to take a call from the Canada Revenue Agency. We'll be speaking with Brian Philbin. He's the Audit, Evaluation, and Risk Branch Assistant Commissioner, as well as the Chief Audit Executive. Joining him is Wendy Saschenbrecker-Tang. She's a Risk Management Director. And I will say we had a little technical difficulty here in the middle, so apologize for a little shift in the sound quality, but that's risk management. The good thing is I had a backup, the way a good risk manager should always have. So I think things turned out well, and you guys will enjoy this one to hear another country's perspective on governmental risk management. So without further ado, let's start the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you all calling in, and why don't we go ahead and start off with Brian?
Good morning, Paul. Thank you. Yes, and nice to meet you virtually over the phone.
Same here, and I enjoyed when you came down to our AFERM conference in D.C., so we enjoyed that very much.
Well, I'm actually drinking out of my AFERM water cup this morning, so I'm well equipped.
That's good. Very good. Okay, so why don't we start off, Brian, did you want to kind of give us a high level, or should we introduce, I guess, both of you there, just to kind of give us a little background on your roles in the program?
Okay, so my role is basically as Assistant Commissioner of the Audit, Evaluation, and Risk Branch. I report to the Commissioner of the agency, so the CEO. We also have a Board of Management, and I have a reporting relationship, a dotted line with the Chair of the Audit Committee. So I'm in charge of all internal audit, evaluation, and enterprise risk management activities and programs at the Canada Revenue Agency.
Good morning. My name is Wendy. Director of Enterprise Risk Management Division. I report directly to Brian. My division is in charge of making sure that the CRA's management and employees are supported to make informed decisions considering their risks, as well as to build and maintain the risk management capacity throughout the organization and to manage their risks.
Okay, great. Well, I think what we'll do is I'll just kind of start off. We have a couple questions here just about your program, and maybe if Brian wants to take the first response, and Wendy, you can jump in there too. But just since we're on the phone, might be a little easier if we kind of do one at a time. Okay.
That's fine.
Very good. So my first question for you all was really just to give us a little bit of insight into why you all decided to even implement an ERM program. How far back does that go, and what was the impetus to start your program?
Okay, great question, Paul. So in 2004, the Government of Canada introduced new policies and guidelines around enterprise risk management, and they were basically integrated across the Government of Canada, including the Canada Revenue Agency. There was also, so that's a first sort of important timeline. The second one was around 2008. A couple of things were pretty significant. First of all, we had the worldwide financial crisis that was a very significant event across the planet. But there was also the maturing of risk management as a practice, driven in large part by the Basel Accords over banks, and I would say that those two factors were an incentive for the senior leaders of the Canada Revenue Agency to essentially say maybe this is a good practice that we should, a good emerging management practice that we should proactively implement in our organization. And because we really would like to understand more about the risks that do face us. So since 2010, a new branch was created, and I was hired to lead it. It was the Enterprise Risk Management Branch, which was subsequently merged with the Corporate Audit and Evaluation Branch in 2013. So since we started the branch, we've really built our level of expertise and engaged in agency risk management processes such as the corporate risk profile, where senior managers across the agency assess enterprise-level risks and develop action plans where required to mitigate them. We also monitor and report on the realization of the action plans themselves. And we make the corporate risk profile available to all employees and other stakeholders through our employee portals. So the corporate risk profile is available to all 45,000 employees. So by understanding our risks and managing them effectively, the CRA can capitalize on exploring new opportunities. Knowledge of risk information at all levels of the organization help the agency meet its objectives and deliver on the results that Canadians expect of us.
Absolutely. So I guess going back to that, the corporate risk profile and in general, when you did start this program up, were there some challenges you faced to gathering the information or getting folks to really speak about their risks?
Well, because it was essentially a new management practice, a new senior leader sitting at the senior table, a new branch, there was a fair amount of change management involved, and it was. I would say that the agency was somewhat ahead of the game as far as actually investing in a function like that. So a lot of education was involved, and one of the ways we decided to go about it is to be helpful for folks. There was a preoccupation that the risk managers were going to go in and tell people, experts in their field, tell these experts how to do their job. So we purposely avoided that type of approach. And what we did was we tried to find strategic opportunities with various partners around the agency who could benefit from our assistance. And what we did is we never imposed ourselves. We just made ourselves available to them and sort of demonstrated what we could do, and gradually gain their trust and confidence like that. But we had to do it one partner at a time, so we did. And one example was we had a very strong support from the start from the information technology branch, because they live and breathe risk all the time. It's embedded in what they do. So they were actually quite happy to have a risk management function internally that they could rely on. Another area where we were successful, there was a very significant branch with which we had no relationship at all to speak of, but they were launching a multi-year, a very large project. So what we did is we embedded a senior risk analyst in their project team for the first 6 months of the project, basically as a free resource that helped them to get their whole, the risk tools and the risk assessment, and also build a culture of risk into that project. We've had nothing but excellent relationships with that branch ever since. That one initiative, that one person who was absolutely fantastic, created a solid foundation that we've been able to build on ever since.
Okay, that's very interesting. So it sounds like in that case you embedded some risk staff in that organization. In general, how are you all organized? Who does your office report to? What's your team look like?
Okay, I'll take that question for you. So our enterprise risk management division, as I mentioned, I report directly to Brian, and then Brian, as assistant commissioner, reports to our commissioner. So then there's a very clear line right to the top. But my division is broken up into two sections. So one is probably a little bit more traditional. It's the corporate risk management section. Here, we focus a lot on understanding and management of the enterprise level risks. We support the management of these risks through value protection and using sound risk intelligence at the enterprise level. We also work with key stakeholders to inform overall planning and reporting. But the second arm of my team, this is a little bit more unique. This is the Risk Management Center of Expertise. This is basically our internal consulting shop. We support managers and employees to really meet their risk responsibilities. We provide facilitation services, advisory, consulting to help them develop tools, help them work through risk identification, and even help prioritize their key deliverables. So the Center of Expertise creates value and tools and methodologies by continuously scanning. We even produce a monthly risk watcher that does the scanning. These reports and services help inform CRA staff of relevant changes to the external landscape, and we also do internal fraud risk assessment.
Oh, wow. So I think that's an excellent way you organize there. I like that consulting approach. I think a lot of our government folks here in the U.S. would be very interested in doing a similar model because, we want to make sure that we're gathering the risks and making sure management is apprised and taking direction. But I think those organizations could really see the value when you all reach out to them and really help them organize their thoughts around risk. I think that's a great way of approaching it.
Yeah, and I think, Paul, we've gotten it to a point now where we're almost a first stop for potential solutions when some of our colleagues have some challenges that they're having difficulty dealing with themselves. I'll give you an example. Last year, one of our assistant commissioners, so one of my colleagues, reached out to me to help because they had a fairly significant issue that they were not able to resolve, and it was creating some issues and tension that was not necessarily healthy. So he reached out to me and basically asked if we could provide some sort of assistance, because one of the advantages of our structure is we don't really have any skin in the game in any particular risks except running our own team. So do I have the right workforce and that sort of stuff. Basically what we did is we developed a prioritization model for them that used a set of criteria to group high priority requests into categories that were developed from with input from across the agency. What happened was a tool resulted in this area increasing its efficiency in meeting deadlines from about 65, which were about 65 to 70% of the time before we intervened, to over 95%, and I understand even some quarters, some months, they hit 100% of meeting the deadlines on time. And what it's done is just brought down the level of friction and stress and to a situation that is just it's running very well now, and people are off worrying about other things because this problem has sort of been solved.
That's great. Yeah, I love to hear the success stories. And actually, along those lines, so for the for your agency, I guess our closest equivalent would be the IRS. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just thinking from your perspective for that type of a mission, I think you talked a little bit about this down at the AFERM conference. There was some reputation risk was an important feature. That's something you guys really thought a lot about. Are there some lessons learned that you've taken from your approach to reputation risk?
Basically, the lessons learned were it was really, it was something that we wanted to address because tax administrations that rely on a voluntary compliance system, in other words, any country that you file a return, you don't get a bill from your tax administration, you file a return and then you get some sort of a confirmation or assessment, but the ball is in your court to go first. Reputation and trust in the fairness of the organization is paramount, and so we were looking to develop a tool that would help us sort of measure how we were doing in managing our reputation. So we work very closely with the IRS. We're co-leaders. Our two organizations are co-leaders of a specialized community of interest that's part of the OECD.
Okay, listeners, this is where we had a slight technical difficulty. So I did ask Brian to start again to discuss a little bit more about the community of interest of the OECD.
There is a community of interest on risk management for tax administrations that is part of the OECD efforts, and there's over 50 countries that are members of the OECD, and the two country leads, so the co-leads of the community of interest, are the IRS and ourselves. So we work very closely with them on putting together this questionnaire that we sent to all the countries. We got 19 countries responded. We had over 150 pages of data that we received and were able to analyze. And out of that, we decided that it would be interesting to develop a maturity model so that we could map where the Canada Revenue Agency would sit on the various items. We have 4 themes and 7 specific categories where we would rest on the maturity model. But we provided the maturity model to all the other countries so that they could actually do it for themselves. One of the things that we noted, because we followed up with the countries about 8 months later, is that we wanted to sort of get a gauge of where the world was. And one of the interesting things that we discovered is our assessment of where they were, where the rest of the world was fairly accurate, except in one area where we had essentially underestimated the maturity of the rest of the countries, and that was in governance. And when we probed those countries as to why we would have underestimated their capacities in governance, they said it's because of your survey and your work and the awareness that you've basically put on our radar screen that we realized that we had to up our game a little bit. So we are very closely involved with the IRS in putting together that survey, the questionnaire, and then developing the maturity model. I would say also, when I was you made reference to when I was in Washington at AFERM. Well, the following day, my colleague and I, who is our head of communications, we spent the entire day with the IRS. So we met their senior leadership team. He met his counterparties in privacy and communications. I had lunch and spent the afternoon with the chief risk officer of the IRS and his team. We've been building that relationship since 2011. You know, we're different countries and we have different tax legislation, and there's a lot of differences, but there are a lot of similarities between the two of us. We share a continent, biggest trading partners, I guess, in the world. And you know, we've basically we are not competitors with the IRS. We really are collaborators, and it's been a tremendous benefit for both of us. They're developing a maturity model to measure enterprise risk management. You know, we're one of the countries that they've asked to provide comments and feedback on. So it's a fantastic relationship. I know we benefit, and I feel that they would probably tell you that they find benefits for themselves out of this relationship as well.
Absolutely, I'm sure they would. We just had one more question for you today, and it kind of goes along the maturity scale. But in general, you know, how would you all kind of rate the maturity of your program? And in general, you know, what are you looking to do next? What is sort of the future for your program?
So we would rate our program probably as if I look at the maturity model, so 1 being basic and 5 being leading, we're probably a 3.5, 3.8, something like that. What we want to do is we want to. So Wendy's team is all of about 15 people and a couple of students, and we have 45,000 employees. So one of our goals is to really operationalize prevention. Make sure that employees understand that they can actually, an individual employee actually acting alone can actually trigger a risk event. and help them to understand how to identify vulnerabilities where they could. So we have been the last couple of years developing, like Wendy's team are tool makers. They're really craftsmen, because everything is there's no cookie cutter. Everything is sort of tailored to the environment, like a consulting firm does. And we've been developing self-assessment tools. So we have an error prevention self-assessment tools that frontline managers can use. We have a internal fraud risk self-assessment tool that frontline managers can use. And we're thinking doing the initial design on a protection of personal information self-assessment tool. And so those tools and that operationalizing risk management is probably something that's front and center on our radar screen, and it really goes to prevention in the front lines of the organization. Wendy, you have...
and just to add to that, we've shared our tools not only with other government departments within Canada, but also in various forums internationally. What people really enjoy about our self-assessment tools is the ease and the approachability of this methodology, but also the fact that it's very much on prevention. Most people, they develop tools that are detection after the fact. We're wanting to really take advantage and manage our reputation by prevention. So this is why we think we can't be everywhere. I only have 15 people and a couple of students, so I can't help everyone, even though I have that Center of Expertise consulting firm. So we want people to be able to help themselves, and that's why we develop these tools.
But probably another thing that's really advantageous for us, I referred to the community of interest and risk at the OECD. So the OECD, a couple of countries, including Canada, work with the OECD to develop what we call a knowledge sharing portal. And just on the risk management side, there are 12 organizations that have uploaded over, 400 artifacts, Wendy, to be shared amongst all countries. So it really helps individual countries look to say, well, we'd like this type of wheel. Has anybody else ever invented one that's what we're looking for or similar enough that we can adapt it? Because as I said, we're different countries, but from a tax administration point of view, it's advantageous for every country that has, especially a self-assessment system, to be as effective and efficient as possible in their operations, because we're big operations, and we want to be efficient. And if we can do so by learning from others, it's a win-win.
Well, great. Well, Brian and Wendy, I really appreciate you all calling in today. I think you had some really interesting things to share with us, and some best practices and things that some of our agencies can hopefully put in place themselves. So once again, thank you very much today.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out, AFERM.org. Have all kinds of good podcasts there for you to look at, listen to. And I'm looking forward to an exciting 2020 with lots of good guests. And as usual, if you have any requests, please feel free to reach out. And until next time, this is Paul Marshall signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.